Started with introductions. My name is Carlos Rosales. I'm the Community Outreach and Engagement Associate here at CCC. And joining me is Laura.
Hi, my name is Laura Jankstrom, and I'm the Director of Civic Engagement Programs here at CCC. So today what we're going to be talking about is child advocacy in New York City. We're going to do this by talking about the structure and function of New York City government and the budget process and where the opportunities for advocacy lie. So we'll jump right in. We have a lot to cover, and before we begin, we need to have a common definitional understanding of what we're talking about today when we say child advocacy. So many of you on this webinar are direct service providers. If you are, would you mind typing into the comment box what kind of work you do? I ask this because, of course, our partners in the child serving space advocate on behalf of New York City's children every day. So do parents, teachers, neighbors, siblings, the list goes on. For the purposes of this webinar, we're not going to focus on that vital form of advocacy at the individual or family level. Instead, we're going to zoom out and focus on systems level advocacy, which we can call policy or legislative advocacy. We hear from our partners in the field time and again that no matter what they do to help the individuals that come through their doors, problems stemming from systemic failures are going to keep putting people in the same positions time and again. And until those systems are fixed, we're going to keep seeing children, families, and communities that are traumatized by poverty and oppression and in need of services. So for us here at CCC, we define advocacy through this lens of policy change. For us, child advocacy is leveraging resources to apply pressure on decision makers to make changes that families and communities want and need. Sometimes those changes involve funneling funds and resources to places and programs that need it. Sometimes the changes involve policies or laws that govern all of our lives. Many times we need both budget and legislative reforms at the same time. So in terms of what we mean by the word resources, in our definition of advocacy, really the more the better. So that's why so much of our advocacy happens in partnership with other people and organizations. You cannot do this work alone. So some people have time to give to the cause. Others don't have time, but may have money. We leverage our political connections and sometimes even hire a lobbyist to increase our access to those with power. But we also rely heavily on our connections to people in the community. Some folks have really powerful personal stories that can go a long way in gaining public support for a specific cause. At CCC, we rely heavily on both quantitative and qualitative data to illustrate what's happening with children in NYC. And we also have a great communications team and even a public relations firm to help us use the press, social media, and other platforms to get our message out. What else do you think we could leverage in terms of resources for advocacy? You can feel free to crowdsource that in the chat box too. And I guess finally, when we say child advocacy, we're talking about influencing the systems that impact child well-being, which, since children are just young people, is basically every system. But to be a little more specific, at CCC, we are multi-issue, but some examples of the things we focus on are child welfare and foster care, family homelessness, early childhood education and education, after-school youth services, health and mental health, and juvenile justice. Being multi-issue, we know that none of this exists in a vacuum, and there are indeed intersections among all of these systems that must be taken into account when we think about budgets and policies holistically. Now, before we begin to talk about how to leverage our resources to apply pressure on decision makers, it's important for us to understand who those decision makers are. Depending on what you're asking for, you need to know which lever of power to push. So this is an organizational chart that lays out the structure of New York City government. I'm sorry if the writing is small. There's a link in that Google document so that you can bring this up on PDF. And I also find that it prints nicely on legal or tabloid size paper if you have that printing capability. Okay, so let's take a look at this. Of course, on top are the people of the 5 boroughs of New York City. We vote elected officials into office. Our taxes pay their salaries, and ostensibly they work for us. That means their jobs aren't easy, right? Politicians have to make decisions every day about what they will prioritize, which would be easy if all of their constituents wanted the same things. But because the people they represent have different viewpoints about what's important, and because the role that lobbyists and special interest groups play, there's constant work being done to educate and influence legislators and their staff in order to sway their priorities and decision making. And this is really the space in which advocacy lives. So next down the line are our politicians, which are our elected officials. And we're going to just review each of them and their position and their function and what opportunities exist for advocacy. So we'll start on the left with borough presidents. All right, now most people in New York City have heard of borough presidents, and many can probably even name their own, but dig deeper than that and you'd probably find that most people don't know much about what the borough president does. So we're gonna start with a fun fact. The role of borough president was created in 1898, which was the same year that the 5 boroughs went from being independent cities with their own mayors to 5 boroughs of one city. Did you know that, Carlos?
No, that's news to me.
So a lot of people think of borough presidents as ceremonial figureheads and cheerleaders, advocates for the borough's interests to the powers that be. And indeed, this is true. Borough presidents should be able to advocate directly to the mayor and city agencies and city council. But New York being the city that it is, one could argue that a borough president's most important function is to influence land use in their borough. Land use can mean a lot of things, but most notably what gets built where, what buildings can be used for, who gets a liquor license, things like that. But while the borough presidents don't have decision-making power, they do have a lot of influence, and they can hold public hearings during which the community weighs in. These can garner, depending on how contentious the issue is, considerable press attention, which brings with it the ability to change public and political will. Borough presidents also get millions of dollars from the city's budget to distribute as they see fit. This is called discretionary funding. So anything that the city isn't funding in its city budget that the borough president supports can greatly benefit from a borough president's discretionary funds. So there's an advocacy opportunity here. If you think the borough president should be spending his or her discretionary funds a certain way, you let them know. And so we'll have a lot more on strategies for how to influence these offices later. So borough presidents also appoint community board members. So let's spend a minute talking about community boards. Community boards are the most local form of government in New York City. Each one is made up of 50 voluntary members tasked with addressing local complaints, zoning and land use issues, making recommendations for the city's budget, and so much more. The community boards are all different. They all function slightly differently. And the priorities are really set by the people who are in the room. So much like the borough presidents themselves, community boards do not have decision-making power, but do carry influence with city council members who then in turn do have a vote. So here we have another advocacy opportunity alert. First of all, as an individual, you can be a public member or apply to be an appointed member of your community board. This is a place you can have your voice heard on the issues that you care about in your community. So to look up your community board and find out meeting times and locations, as well as contact information for your district manager, I'm just gonna very quickly share how you do that because it's not incredibly intuitive. Here we go. So you have this community board website here. This is on your Google Doc, but once you get here, you put your street address in and your borough and you hit submit, and then it takes you to this crazy map. All you have to do is go to the right-hand side where this chart is, and you go down to neighborhood information. And it tells you here, not only what your community district is, but it'll give you a link to the website, and there you have it. So they're not all set up the same, so I'm not going to navigate around Community Board 1, but you should have all of the information there once you get to the page about you know, who the district manager is, when the community board meets, the rules and regulations, the priorities, all of that sort of thing. So that's how you find it. You can just show up as a member of the public and even join committees without an appointment, though without an appointment you can't vote. You're not a voting member. If you would like to apply for an appointment, you should visit your borough president's website for specific requirements for your borough on how to apply. It's worth noting here that youth 16 and up are eligible to apply also. And then one more thing I will say about community boards and advocacy is this. With the mayor's plan to curb family homelessness, there are dozens of new shelters that are scheduled to be built across the city in the coming years. With reforms to the juvenile justice system that we've had recently, new detention facilities and placement facilities are needed. As New York City students call for the integration of the school system, we need schools that welcome kids from every neighborhood. And you know, a huge reason that it's so hard to build these facilities and advance equity in schools is community opposition. So when one of these fights inevitably comes to your community, be the person who stands up at the community board meeting and says, I stand with homeless families, or I stand for second chances and new beginnings, or I stand for equity and opportunity for all students. Support the creation of supportive communities, starting with your own. And just to close the loop on this slide, borough boards are made up of the borough president, the city council members of the borough, and the chairpersons of each community board in the borough. And they set their own agendas and decide the priorities for that borough. All right, here we are back at our chart. The comptroller is next, but we're actually going to skip that position. It's a very important role, but the comptroller is like the city's accountant. Nobody should be trying to influence the comptroller, who should be neutral and responsible for honest auditing and accounting. So we will move on to the mayor. Here's an image of New York City's previous and current mayors at City Hall, where the mayor's office is located. In fact, the mayor's office occupies an entire wing in City Hall, with the other wing used for public hearings and other business of the City Council. And just a plug that City Hall, if you've never had a tour or been there, is awesome and very historical, and I would just recommend signing up for one of their daily tours that they do. All right, so the mayor is responsible for the management and delivery of government programs and services. He's responsible for all the city agencies that administer these programs and services and appoints deputies or leaders for each city agency. So you can go back to that big chart here and check out the colorful boxes which list all of the city's agencies. You can see that in New York City, the mayor is dealing with the nation's largest school system. He's dealing with the NYPD and the fire department, child care system, the child welfare and juvenile justice systems, housing, homelessness, parks, libraries, all of the systems that impact children, families, and communities. The mayor is accountable for how they function. Now, if you have an issue, you can try to advocate with the city agencies, but as many of you probably know, they report directly to the mayor and can't help you out much without layers of bureaucracy and approval standing in the way. So as such, you are better off trying to influence the mayor himself. And again, in a bit, we'll talk about the strategies and tactics you can use. And lastly, about the mayor, in addition to administering the city agencies, the mayor must also create budget plans for how the city will take in and spend funds. He has to negotiate that with the city council, who in turn must adopt the mayor's budget plan each year. And we're going to get much more into the budget process to come. So after the mayor is the public advocate. There's often confusion about the role of the public advocate since they cannot vote along with the city council, but they may introduce legislation. So straight from the public advocate's website, just so that we're clear, the public advocate serves as an ombudsman for city government, providing oversight for city agencies, investigating citizens' complaints about city services, and making proposals to address perceived shortcomings or failures of those services. The public advocate serves on the committee which selects the director of the New York City Independent Budget Office and appoints members to several boards and commissions, including one member of the New York City Planning Commission. The public advocate also serves as chair of the Commission of Public Information and Communication. Along with the mayor and the comptroller, the public advocate is one of 3 municipal offices elected by all cities' voters. And in the event of a vacancy or incapacity by the mayor, the public advocate is first in line to become the mayor. So this position is about influence. It's about being a good government watchdog. It's about, it's a great platform for politicians that prioritize ethics and accountability. And much like the borough presidents, the office is largely what the individual elected to the role makes it. Our current public advocate is Jumaane Williams. He was previously a New York City council member. And since he has the power to introduce, inform, and support new legislation, and because the role necessitates that he hold government accountable, the public advocate is definitely someone to engage in advocacy efforts, particularly if your issue is one that the public advocate has a history of supporting. Okay, next up we have the City Council. New York City's 5 boroughs are divided into 51 council districts, which you see here in this map. The districts do overlap with community districts, though not perfectly. So you can have 2 or even 3 council members that share boundaries within a community district. The people of each council district elect their city council member every 4 years, and the members' term limit out after 2 consecutive 4-year terms. Each city council member has an office within his or her own district, as well as a legislative office at 250 Broadway, which is across the street from City Hall. When reaching out to your council member to discuss a concern, you might consider bringing community concerns to the district office and broader policy concerns to the legislative office. But honestly, if you reach out to either, they're going to be able to direct you to the appropriate person to start that conversation. And we can also think of it like if the mayor is the city's executive branch, then the city council is the legislative branch, and as such functions much like Congress does at the federal level. So what do they do? Primarily, the council introduces and votes on legislation. They negotiate and approve the city's budget with the mayor. They monitor city agencies to make sure they're effectively serving New Yorkers, and they review land use and make decisions about the growth and development of the city. The council is led by the city council speaker, who is elected by the council members, and many times we target our advocacy toward the speaker since he or she determines the priorities of the council. So if you'd like to find out who your council member is or how to contact them, if you're doing issue-based advocacy, you can explore who sits on the various committees that impact your issue. There are links in the Google Doc to the City Council website, and you can navigate around there to find all of that information. There's contact information for both the district office and the legislative office, and on that homepage you can look up who the committees are, who are on each committee. You can also look at the public hearings calendar to see when there will be hearings related to issues that you care about. Here you see an image of the City Council hearing room where city agencies and members of the public testify before the council on government matters. So I'm gonna quickly show you how to look up the City Council hearings. So we'll go here to our documents, hearings calendar, great. So here you see the hearings calendar, and you'll have, you know, what is the committee that's holding the meeting, where is it being held, what time is it, and you can pretty much guarantee over here, if it says oversight, that there will be an opportunity for you to testify. There's also some meetings, right, where it's just a committee meeting, it's not an oversight hearing. So that's a little bit iffy. It will depend on where the committee is in discussing a new bill, because at a certain point, public testimony is over and the committee needs to just meet to weigh what they have heard. So if you ever have a question about whether the meeting will allow members of the public to testify, you can call the legislative office of the chair of that committee. So they'll either be able to answer the question or put you in touch with someone who can. So just like an easy way to find that is to go to meeting details. And here you can go to the committees and it will show you who's on the committee and who the chairperson is, right? So for this one, the chairperson is Margaret Chin, and then you can just toggle to Margaret Chin's page on the council website and find all of her contact information. So there is a little bit of like sleuthing involved, but once you sort of know what to look for, it's easy to find. All right, so let's go back. So the way a public hearing works is that the committee chair will open the meeting and let the room know what's being discussed. Then the relevant city agencies will have a chance to testify first. So for instance, if the hearing is about schools, the DOE will testify first. After the agency testifies, the council members present can ask questions, and it often gets contentious since the council is responsible for oversight and holding these agencies and thus the mayor's office accountable. And then after that portion is over, advocates, community-based organizations, and individuals are called up in panels of 3 to 4 people, and each person is allowed to speak for 2 to 3 minutes. Though you can submit written testimony as well, that can be as long as you want. So if you do want to sign up to testify, you simply show up at the hearing and fill out a slip of paper that the Master of Arms, who is stationed by the door, will give you. At that point, you can also submit copies of your written testimony. And if you don't want to testify, but you're interested in the hearing anyway, you can go and just observe. Alternatively, you can find the recording after the fact if you go back to that hearings calendar I was just demonstrating. I would say, just from experience, if you want to get information on what the city is doing in a particular area or what advocates are pushing for, there is a ton of information shared at these hearings. And you can pick up copies of other people's written testimony that have lots of background on the issue. So even if you don't think you're necessarily ready to testify, there's a lot of amazing information you can walk away with. And it can actually be pretty exciting to watch the council members in action on the issues that they're excited about. Okay, and my last slide on the city council is about discretionary funding. Here's a picture of our city council speaker, Corey Johnson. So discretionary funding is something that a lot of nonprofit providers are interested in learning about because it's an opportunity for them to apply for funding straight to the city council. You know, like if you don't get a contract from an RFP that you submitted, there's always this sort of second chance. So what is discretionary funding? According to the council policies and procedures, discretionary funding is an appropriated sum of money in the city's expense budget allocated to eligible not-for-profit organizations by the council as a whole or by a member of the council. Opportunities for budget advocacy exist when we attempt to influence how the city council allocates these funds. Organization in need of funding can apply for the money directly. CCC does not accept government funding, so we talk to the council members about the impacts of what we're seeing in the budget, hoping they'll use the information we bring them when making decisions about what they want to fund. So we're very quickly going to just touch on 2 types of discretionary funding. There's citywide initiatives. These, in most cases, the council will provide funding to specific nonprofits. They're usually citywide in scope, although they may focus on high-need populations. And the method for allocating funding is really not super transparent and varies by initiative. And then there's local member initiatives. So each member of the city council receives an amount each year to meet local needs in their district. So they also get additional funds for youth and the aging and factors including local needs and poverty rates. The members' request and other considerations determine the amount. Again, like not super clear or transparent how those happen, but they do have to report on them at the end of the day. So if you're looking for what the council is spending that money on, you look for this Schedule C items in the budget documents. Great. Okay, so here we are back at our chart. Only to say that for the purposes of this webinar, we're actually going to skip over the last two, which are the district attorneys and the independent budget office, not because they're not important, but because they're not usually the primary targets of our advocacy. So at your leisure, check out the websites of the city agencies, follow the ones you're interested in on Twitter. The first step of advocacy is actually always to be informed. So to that end, I'd love to crowdsource where people get their local news about politics. So if you want to put that in the chat box for everybody, I'll just mention a few, and these are linked to in the Google document. We like the Gotham Gazette. We like New York One's Inside City Hall. We like Chalkbeat, City Limits. And you can subscribe to the City and State First and Last Read for a snapshot of like what is hot at City Hall that day. You get one email in the morning and one in the evening. And again, those links are in the doc. All right, moving right along, we are going to spend a couple minutes talking about New York City's budget. A lot of advocacy takes place around the city budget. What gets funded, what gets cut, how much teachers are paid, if low-income families have access to adequate childcare subsidies, and can go on forever. So here you see the New York City's adopted budget in fiscal year 2020 was $92.77 billion. And to the right, you can see the breakdown of the revenue, i.e. where that money came from. Living in New York City is different than living in any other city in the country, just in terms of sheer size and revenue. There are over 8.6 million people living in New York City. If you compare that to Los Angeles, which is the second most populated city in the country with about 4 million residents, we're more than twice as large. In fact, there are more people living in the 5 boroughs of New York City than are living in 34 of our nation's entire states. And in addition to being an incredibly populous city, we also have local taxes that most of these 8.6 million people contribute to through income tax, sales tax, and property tax. So if you add the revenue from our local taxes to the revenue we receive from state and federal block grants, that's where you get this annual budget of $92 billion. Again, like our population, the NYC budget is bigger than most state budgets, approximately the same size as the budget of the state of Florida. And just to point out, we get about $15 billion of this money from the state and $7 billion from the federal government. So the previous chart showed us the city's revenue. This is showing expenditures. Here you can see what we spend on education, social services, public safety and judicial, health, housing, parks and recs, libraries, all of these services that are vital to helping children thrive. With the largest public school system in the country, serving 1.1 million school children, it's not a wonder that our largest spending is on education, though we know there is work to be done with respect to serving all students equitably. With more than half of New York City's children living in poverty, we have a robust spending on the social safety net, though again, families and providers still report barriers to accessing needed social services. So let us know if there's anything here that surprises you. Feel free to enter reactions and questions into the chat box, and we can try to get to those at the end. For those of you who are really excited about these budget charts, here's another one that breaks down how much each sector receives by city, federal, and state revenues. And if you want to go into the weeds of the 2020 adopted budget, there's a link in the Google Doc to this entire comptroller's report that I've been referencing throughout the last few slides. So what you can see here is that we get just $15 billion of our budget from the state, most of which goes towards education, and we get just $7 billion from the federal government, about half of which goes to social services. So an important note here is that much of our social services sector relies on federal funding. According to the comptroller, 40% of the administration of children's services budget, 34% of the Department of Homeless Services budget, and 16% of the Social Services Human Resources Administration budget come from federal grants. But at the end of the day, though they are large, these are just numbers that need to be scrutinized with respect to how resources are allocated. And that is very much at the heart of what we do with our budget advocacy. Every year when the mayor comes out with his budget proposals, our policy analysts do the fancy math to see what's changing in terms of resource allocation, i.e. budget cuts, and create our budget priorities around restoring or increasing funding in areas that service providers, communities, and families say they need the most. So all the budget documents we analyze can be found at the city's Office of Management and Budget. That link is also in the Google Doc. And so the budget process, a lot of advocacy happens during the budget process. There are certain times you'll want to note as particularly important to make your issue visible to the mayor and the city council. So the New York City fiscal year begins on July 1st and ends on June 30th. The city is required to have a balanced budget for the upcoming fiscal year by June 30th, or the state takes control of the city's budget. So the mayor submits his preliminary budget to the city council by January 16th. The city council holds public hearings and by March 25th issues a response to the preliminary budget aimed at influencing the executive budget. So the preliminary budget is really a preview of what the administration is prioritizing and what the city council is going to throw their weight behind. And everyone here is sort of feeling each other out. By April 26th, the mayor submits the executive budget to the city council, and the city council once again holds hearings. And this is when things start to really heat up. So the mayor and the city council then negotiate a balanced budget by June 5th that, once voted on and approved by the council, and in turn not vetoed by the mayor, becomes the adopted budget. So throughout the fiscal year, there are budget modifications in response to changing conditions, but we don't have time to really go into that. Importantly, every citizen has an important role to play in the budget process. You can make your voice heard in the city's budget by meeting, calling, or writing to your city council member, testifying at public hearings, and participating in rallies and press conferences. In fact, sometimes waiting for the budget process to begin before you start advocating is too late. Many groups start in the fall while there's still time to sway what gets into even that preliminary budget and the council's response to it. So just all that to say, it's never a bad time, except maybe the summer, to be moving the needle on your initiatives, though the sense of urgency really picks up around city budget time. And at long last, I'm going to turn it over to Carlos.
Yes, hi everyone again. So we're going to transition over now to talk and kind of reflect on the different ways, tangible ways we can advocate to elected and public leaders in New York City and state. So just to recap, a number of different things that Laura mentioned throughout the past numerous slides. CCC participates and advocates using advocacy tools such as call-in days, letter writing campaigns, both of which really help influence and push and make representatives and elected leaders and their offices aware of important critical issues that are being considered by different advocacy organizations, but also the community members, community leaders, and other advocates that are fighting for issues important for children and families across New York City. With the digital age coming to full fruition, we also now are doing, similar to letter writing campaigns, e-action campaigns in which pre-written letters are created. So that way all a person has to do is log on or go to the website where this e-action campaign is happening, provide some details. Usually it's a name, email, or phone number. Folks can also craft their own message if they desire, but it's really an easy way for someone to just reach out to their elected or public official through an automated process. So that way, once a person hits submit, they will be able to send that email automatically to the person they wish to advocate for, to. Laura also mentioned in-depth public testimonies. If you go to CCC's website, you'll see a section where we have a full list of different testimonies in which CCC has provided in different forums. Please take a look at those testimonies as great examples for how a testimony is written, and they're free and open, available to you all, and you can see kind of what particular areas CCC is currently pushing for. And lastly, something that we've been reflecting on and learning through the past couple of years is that while we have policy team members that are going and meeting with elected officials, like having those meetings alongside with community members, grassroots organizations, and other advocates are equally important. And it really makes a difference to not only see the learning that community members go through as they experience participating in with their elected officials in a meeting, whether it be in the city or going up to Albany during our advocacy days. And it's of real value to the elected official as well, because it lets them know that community members are interested in this issue, and they're coming up front and center, coming to their space to advocate for the needs that they have in their community. So now I want to talk a little bit about social media and social media days of actions and the way we use this as an advocacy tool. While there's many ways to use social media in advocacy, we'll focus on using social media through campaign work, or where we advocate elected and public officials for some type of policy change or another commitment that we're looking for. And two case studies that I want to share with you today. The first is Raise the Age, where CCC is one of the leading stakeholders on the campaign. And this presents more of a long-term campaign that we've been a part of for a number of years and are still a part of today. And then the New York Counts 2020 campaign advocating for the 2020 census, which is more of a short-term effort. Not that it isn't important, but it's more momentary and immediate and pressing just because of the timeline with the 2020 census. So we're members of this coalition, and I'll walk through with you now how we use social media in these two areas. Let me switch over to Raise the Age to provide a preview of what I'm talking about. So to give you a little bit of background information, for those who are not aware, Raise the Age is a campaign that focuses on getting New York State to pass legislation to raise the age of criminal responsibility in New York. For historical reference, New York State was one out of only 2 states that automatically prosecuted all 16 and 17-year-olds as adults, even for minor offenses. I say was because on October 1st, 2019, the Raise the Age New York law was fully phased in, ending our state's practice of automatically charging all 16 and 17-year-olds as adults for any offense. So here I'm showing you an example of social media toolkits that was developed specifically for this campaign, and is a useful and effective way to engage a wide audience to adopt and use consistent messaging that is targeted over a period of time for this advocacy effort. As you can see, there's several key elements to consider for effective social media advocacy. The first is I'm highlighting here is understanding key or strategic advocacy periods that will help us inform how the messages should be defined and in what way, so it influences the target audience you're looking to influence during that advocacy phase. So as you can see here, there's different critical key points in regards to referencing the 2016 calendar for Raise the Age, where there are awareness days, legislative awareness days, lobby days, budget milestones, and of course when the legislative session ends, so that way folks know when are key moments to advocate on social media. It's also important to consider the how or the what you're directing your audience to. And so here we have 3 different examples of that, using hashtags, linking to websites, and action alerts, which is a form of a call to action, and really designing social media posts so that way you can not only inform, but also expand the reach of your audience, as well as track how your message is doing. And using hashtags and other forms that I'll get to in a little bit later are ways to be able to gain insight onto how effective your social media messaging is doing. It's also important to provide sample social media posts that can do different things. As you can see here, we have examples for Twitter and Facebook as well. And these examples shows that there are different kinds of social media posts that are being designed. Some of them are to inform or educate the audience that you're engaging. You're also telling a story with some of these posts. And then you also want to direct people towards action. So there are different social media posts that do different things, and it's important to consider that in the design, and also provide examples of those differences, so that way whoever are using these tools, whether it be partners or community members or any other group that is advocating with you, that they understand and kind of develop similar posts, so that way there's consistency in the messaging. It's also important to know who you're engaging and target specific messages to specific people. So you can see at the end of this toolkit that we have social media handles for the different organizations involved. Some of them are allies, but also people that you hope to influence. So key legislatures, reporters, and media groups, other key influencers to follow or tag, and of course, the governor. So depending on the campaign and the work that you're doing, you'll craft who those targeted messages are going to. That way you can get them involved or push buttons that need to be pushed, so that way they are influenced to address the issues that you're trying to campaign for. So some tips for effective engagement that I'd like to go through. Like I said, and is demonstrated here, provide sample social media posts for your advocacy efforts, but also for any release dates, events that you're promoting, and publications that are being created as a part of your advocacy efforts. Make sure you include clear calls to actions that is tailored to your audience. Make sure you also close the loops on those call to actions. So once someone engages in a type of activity you wish them to engage in, what is the follow-up, or what happens after? What's next? Another way to say it. Aim for no more than 3 hashtags or @handle mentions per post. 1 or 2 is even better. This is for Twitter, but ideally put links 3/4 into the message, and this is mainly because with Twitter you have shorter messages, ideally about 120 characters, but you can go beyond that. So that way you get more engagement. Across all social media, make sure you use visuals and call attention to any videos for different styles of learning or absorbing knowledge or information. And then just don't push out information by itself. Also interact with the people that you're engaged with on social media, your friends, your followers, and other like-minded organizations, so that way you're bouncing off the energy that and the momentum that is being created as you engage via social media. And then lastly, something that I want to make a distinction, because it's also in this toolkit right here, is that there is a distinction between messaging and talking points. When we talk about messaging, we're really focusing on trying to get someone to buy in or have a stake in the issue that you're advocating for. When we're talking about talking points are really designed to try to get someone to understand either something about the issue or the issue itself. So that's just an important distinction to make when you're designing some of these things, because what you create to get someone to buy into something or to be informed will look different. Okay, so let's go back to the presentation. So just for time's sake, I'm going to move past case study number 2. I'll follow up and share you an example of how we've engaged in social media around the 2020 census, and make sure if anyone has any questions, you can follow up with me after this webinar. So now we want to talk about rallies, press conferences, and protests. New Yorkers have the right to engage in peaceful protest activities on public sidewalks, in public parks, and on public streets in New York City. This includes the right to distribute handbills or leaflets, the right to hold press conferences, demonstrations and rallies, and the right to march on public sidewalks and in public streets. The city imposes restrictions on these activities, and in some instances, one must obtain a permit before engaging in certain activities. The New York Civil Liberties Union has an amazing resource on the ins and outs of different kinds of demonstrations, and we shared that link with you as well in that document. So questions around if you need a permit. So if you want to distribute handbills on public sidewalks or in a public park, have a demonstration, have a rally or press conference on a public sidewalk, or march in a public sidewalk, and you don't intend to use amplified sound, You do not need any permit. If you want to use amplified sound on public property, or want to have an event where more than 20 people in New York City, where there are more than 20 people in a New York City park, or if you wish to conduct a march in public streets, you will need to have a permit. If you wish to have an event on the steps of City Hall or in a plaza, or in the plaza in front of the steps, you need to make special arrangements with the police department. You are entitled to have a rally, press conference, or demonstration on the steps of City Hall or in a plaza directly in front of the steps. You do not need a permit for events in front of City Hall, but you do need to schedule your event with police department officials. To schedule an event, call the NYPD Precinct 5 Community Affairs Division at the number 212-341-5063. Though you are entitled to have an event, there are certain restrictions at City Hall. Groups are limited to 300 people, and only a portion of the steps may be used. All attending an event must pass through metal detectors. So just kind of to recap, effective advocacy influences public policy, laws, and budgets by using facts, their relationships, the media, and messaging to educate government officials and the public on the changes you want to bring for children and their families. So I want to just share with you some of CCC steps for effective child advocacy. The first is know the facts. To gain and maintain credibility, it is critical that you have all of the facts on both sides of any issues. Having this information at your fingertips will help you in conversations with government officials, the media, other advocates, and the general public. CCC has the largest municipal database on child well-being in the world, open and free to use. The link is in the chat box at data.cccnewyork.org. The second is use the facts. Any position you take should be grounded in facts. It is often helpful to put your facts into one-pagers that you can distribute. Have clear and concise messages. Government officials, the press, and general public do not have time for long-winded conversations or documents. You need to get your point quickly and concisely. And remember to watch out for jargon and use acronyms used in different fields. You want everyone to understand the issues you are raising. Nurture relationships and work collaboratively. Advocating is a joint venture. You need to find your allies and work with them, increasing your chances of success when there are large numbers of organizations and people at your side. Whenever possible, be sure you and your allies have consistent data and the same message. Engage the public. Use media, social media, petitions, letters, emails, and other grassroots strategies to engage as many New Yorkers as you can. Make your voice heard. Advocacy is not a place for being shy. Make sure you spread the word through meetings with government officials, press conferences, letters, petitions, rallies, and phone calls. And don't forget to say thank you. Remember that everyone is busy and their time is valuable. Keep your meetings short and always say thank you afterwards. When your advocacy is a success, always thank everyone who helped you achieve your victory. So now we're going to transition to questions. I'll give you all a minute to absorb, but you can answer questions via the Q&A box below. And right now I'm going to unmute so that way participants can speak if they prefer to do so that way.
You could also type the questions into the Q&A or the chat box.
So all participants should be unmuted now, so feel free to speak. If you're speaking and we're not responding, just send us a quick message on the chat box.
Hi, this is Deborah. Can you hear me?
And just keep in mind, if you're muted on your end, you'll need to unmute.
Oh, Deborah says this info was so helpful. Thank you, Deborah. And if anybody thinks of questions after the fact or when you're looking at the slide deck, we send it around, just always feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to answer any other questions. I mean, there were a lot of things that we wanted to say that we couldn't just because it's very complex and we only had an hour. There was also a question if we could do this presentation live for community groups, and the answer is yes, just depending on our availability. We're happy to come out and share this information with any of your community groups. In fact, we would love to. Is there a way I can share this with others? Yeah, Deborah, we're going to be emailing the link to the recording of this webinar, and you can feel free to share. It may also live on our website if we review it and decide that it's good enough to live there, but you'll always have the link to it. All right, well, we have 2 minutes left. Any last burning questions that people have? I'm just gonna, full disclosure, this was my first webinar and that was so exciting. I'm so glad that I did it. Okay, everybody.
So if there's anyone who had trouble speaking or we couldn't hear you on our end, please follow up with us in an email, send us any additional questions, and we'll make sure to promptly respond. You have our contact information right here. Laura and my emails are available to you. And of course, as a reminder, this webinar is recorded and will be shared with everyone who participated as well. So thank you. Enjoy the rest of your afternoons. Have a great weekend, and hopefully we'll be connecting soon.
Bye.